Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my wide receiver strength of schedule for the rest of the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the wide receiver position, but also their strength of schedule rest of season from week 7 through 16 to kind of give you guys a perspective on which wide receivers you should be going out and either picking up off the waivers, trading for before deadlines, or also being holding on to them to make sure that you have the ample lineup to, as soon as you get to the fantasy playoffs, be able to string together wins and pick up a fantasy championship in 2019. Before we get into today's episode, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, join the community, click that subscribe button, join the community by also clicking the bell notification button by getting up to date on all of my latest content. And also, as soon as my live stream starts, you are notified immediately by clicking that bell button. Also, don't forget, again, to click the like button on today's video. Hey guys, how's it going? So before we begin, like we typically do, we talk about matchups. To the left of me is how much defenses are giving up to opposing wide receivers thus far this season throughout the first 6 weeks of the fantasy football season in half-point PPR on average. So to kind of give you some perspective, the way that I calculated it obviously is similar to how I did it this offseason. I similarly had a wide receiver strength of schedule video before the season began to kind of give you guys some perspectives from Fantasy Pros, from myself, and from Pro Football Focus to see exactly how we can determine which players have the easiest strength of schedule. Obviously, all the lists were incorrect, but we're getting to a point that we have a pretty solidified data pool that we can determine, hey, if these defenses have been this bad against opposing wide receivers thus far, what's going to change that going forward? Not much. So what we're going to do today is talk about exactly which players have the best strength of schedule going forward and which players we want to target. So to kind of give you some perspective on exactly who is giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers so that we can have this as a reference, this is here on the list. So after doing my calculations for the rest of the regular season, or for the rest of the fantasy football season, weeks 7 through 16, and then also doing my calculations from weeks 14, 15, 16, which are typically the fantasy football playoffs, this is what I have come up with. So as of right now, going forward, who has the easiest schedule? Well, it looks to be that two of these teams from the NFC West, the Seahawks and the 49ers, have the easiest strength of schedule at the wide receiver position. Then we have the Titans and Colts, Jets, Saints, Falcons, Buccaneers, Panthers. Yes, that is four NFC South teams. Not a surprise. I've been talking about this all year long, going back all the way to August. And then we have a bunch of other teams that, so be it. And then who's sitting on the bottom still? I remember the Kansas City Chiefs were on the bottom of the list before the season started in terms of strength of schedule. That has not changed. They still play against one of the toughest schedules in terms of at the wide receiver position. Thankfully for the Baltimore Ravens, they don't have any wide receivers, so they don't got to worry about that, so on and so forth. But just kind of give you some perspective. Also, in terms of to the right of that, we have the playoff strength of schedule next to me, which we have the Indianapolis Colts being a team that has shown up twice, and the Titans in the top 4 in both categories. Those are two teams that, sure, the Titans, they don't really have any offensive weapons in terms of wide receiver that are consistently used, but there's a reason why T.Y. Hilton is on the thumbnail. He's a guy that is not only going to have an easy strength of schedule going forward, but have an easy strength of schedule in the fantasy playoffs. Perhaps that's a guy that you want to invest in going forward before his price gets a little too expensive. Now that he's coming off of a bye week, people aren't really thinking of T.Y. Hilton as that stud potential wide receiver one that he can be potentially. So maybe this is the time to snag him. Anyway, to kind of give you some perspective, the way that I scheduled this out is that I took the difficulty of, for example, a game. Let's say, for example, the Philadelphia Eagles are giving up the most points to opposing wide receivers. So a team on their schedule will get that 1 point. I took the remaining games that they had on schedule. Some teams have 10 games, some teams have 9 games, depending on when their bye week was. You divide that number that was totaled up by each respective team, by the number of games remaining, and on the right of every team is, at least on the left-hand side, on the very left in terms of the rest of the season, week 7 through 16, that is the average in which teams that they are playing against are ranked. So that's just an average, but again, Kansas City really going to have some struggles, while Seattle, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf going forward, especially now that Will Disley is gone. Somebody else has to step up in that offense. There's a lot of opportunity there. The 49ers don't have any wide receivers, but I want to mention a couple guys specifically, like yesterday in the running backs video. If you haven't checked that out, go and do so. I want to mention a couple guys that we should be paying attention to and perhaps investing in and trading for. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Let's talk about a couple guys going forward. So, like I mentioned, Tyler Lockett, T.Y. Hilton, and the Jets were sitting up there with Robbie Anderson. I want to go over all three of these teams because look at their schedule. Starting with the Jets. I've been talking about the Jets' schedule going forward. It is absolutely incredible. Just look at it. After you get past this game in which you play against the New England Patriots on Monday Night Football in Week 7, you have a schedule in which you get to play against Jacksonville, potentially without Jalen Ramsey, and then you have your stretch of games in which you are going to murder teams and put the league on high alert, pretty much. Miami, the Jets, the Redskins, the Raiders, Cincinnati. Sure, they can be the 29th. They can be tough against wide receivers, but that defense is not going to be able to hold. Trust me. People just run all over them. That's all the Cincinnati Bengals do. They ran over, and I promise you the Jets will be able to pass on them. Then they play against Miami again. Baltimore, Pittsburgh have not been great defensively, but this is an extremely favorable matchup, especially for guys like Robbie Anderson and Jamison Crowder going forward. If this offense can take the next step, maybe even Demaryius Thomas can become a fantasy viable option. Sure, you still have Le'Veon Bell catching balls. Chris Herndon's going to get more implemented, but you never know. You could have three viable wide receivers here because of just how high scoring their games are going to be in terms of their offense because of how easy the matchups are going forward. But Robbie Anderson, a guy that if he is not owned in your league, not only am I surprised, but he needed to have been owned by the draft, right? At least as of right now. Obviously, maybe many people have dropped him because of the fact that Darnold is out and the fact that he wasn't producing. So I can understand it, but then again, he needs to be picked up ASAP. All right, moving on. T.Y. Hilton, there's a reason why he's on the thumbnail. Again, like I mentioned, the Tennessee Titans and the Indianapolis Colts are two teams that showed up in the top 4 in rest of season schedule and fantasy football playoff schedule. I mean, look at this. They've already passed their bye week. It looks clean. Besides the game against the Denver Broncos, which is going to be tough, no-fly zone is already in full commencement. As of right now, Houston, shootout. Pittsburgh could be a shootout. Miami, that's easy. Jacksonville without Ramsey becomes easier. Houston is another shootout. Tennessee is going to be a tougher matchup, sure. But then you get Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and Carolina, 3 NFC South teams that love the shootout in the fantasy playoffs against you. Those are teams that they want to compete, that want to make the playoffs. And it's going to be a couple games between whether or not they do so or not, especially considering they play each other after Week 10 so often. Man, T.Y. Hilton looks like a great fantasy football grab going forward. If he can stay healthy, which he dealt with a little bit of a hamstring injury thus far this season, if he can stay healthy going forward, I really do believe T.Y. Hilton can be a big surprise for fantasy owners and do a lot of work going forward. The last guy I wanted to go ahead and check out again, the Seattle Seahawks, technically, by the calculation, have the easiest schedule going forward. Just looking at it right now, Baltimore, you get Atlanta, Tampa Bay, then you get the 49ers, which, they're going to have to compete. A bye week into Philly, Minnesota, the Rams, who can't play defense. I heard that Aqib Talib is going to make his way onto the injured reserve, has a potential to return potentially by week 14, but I'm not holding my breath. Then you get to play against Carolina and then play against the Arizona Cardinals. Again, goodness gracious. Tyler Lockett, who has already been, 10 plus points every single week thus far this season, is going to continue to have a lot of potential. Goodness gracious. If Tyler Lockett ends up just continuing to see more and more targets, he might end up being another one of these breakout wide receivers. He's already having a great year. It's only going to get better from here on out, certainly. All right, so let's go ahead and really quickly, before I mention a couple of the other names, again, I mentioned this earlier before the season even started. If you go back to my wide receiver strength of schedule for the wide receiver position, I had Julio on the thumbnail for a good reason. And I even mentioned this yesterday, so I didn't really want to go over the graphic again. But again, this is something you need to know. The running back position, the wide receiver position, in the NFC South is going to be a hot commodity after week 9, week 10-ish, because a lot of them have bye weeks in week 9. I'm telling you, it is going to be fireworks coming out of the division, and you want as many pieces of those offenses as you can possibly have, and this is exactly why. Let's go ahead and let's show you guys, shall we? Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, and Chris Godwin. We have 3 of the top wide receivers thus far this season in the NFC South. What exactly are they capable of? We know what they're capable of. They're incredibly good wide receivers. When Michael Thomas gets Drew Brees back, he's only getting better. Julio Jones in this offense is an all-pro, and he continues to have monster games. Chris Godwin is showing everyone up, producing some of the most incredible fantasy performances that we've seen in quite some time in terms of the wide receiver position. In terms of consistency, the guy is doing the business. Look at their schedules after week 9. Look at this. It's green beans. This is literally the money-making division. The NFC South is something that I cannot explain to you why this is the way, but they cannot guard wide receivers, and every single team in this division has stacked wide receiver talent. I don't have any of the Carolina Panthers here, but we know from what we just saw this past week, Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore, they are no joke. Yes, they are younger players. They are going to get there eventually, and they are going to be a part of this division in which they're going to have a lot of value. But just looking at it prospectively, I mean, goodness gracious, playing against Atlanta, Tampa Bay, Carolina, Atlanta, Michael Thomas, that 4-game stretch right there, easy pickings. Sure, when you get into the fantasy playoffs, it gets a little bit more difficult, but Michael Thomas, when he has Drew Brees, the quarterback, it doesn't matter. You're matchup proof. Julio Jones, New Orleans, Carolina, Tampa Bay, New Orleans, Carolina. Sure, you get to play against San Francisco. Everybody does on this schedule because that's just how it works right now. But again, matchup proof. And then you get Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, that combination, that duo. After this week's bye week, sure, you get Tennessee, which I still think Chris Godwin, as of right now, is matchup proof in terms of targets. You get Seattle, Arizona, New Orleans, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Detroit, and Houston. A lot of shootouts potentially coming in the way or in the direction of the NFC South. I am so excited about this division. I can't stop talking about it because I truly do believe this is going to be some unprecedented numbers coming in the direction of this division in general. So for those of you who are interested, Michael Thomas, I want to buy him. Julio Jones, I'd love to have a piece of him. Calvin Ridley, don't mind it whatsoever. The way that Austin Hooper is playing, maybe even him. And then we're talking about the wide receivers for the Buccaneers. As of right now, the time is probably already past to buy Mike Evans. You've had many opportunities to do so. If you already have, continue to stay on ship and keep moving. Chris Godwin's a monster. And then potentially the cheapest commodities to invest in that division is the Carolina Panthers wide receivers. As of right now, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, again, they're going to play against those respective teams, and both of them are going to have pretty decent games. If Cam Newton comes back and is healthy, we could see a lot of production out of the two of them, and I'm really excited about the potential of this division after said time. Again, there are other players, there are other teams that have great matchups going forward. Like I've mentioned many times, especially this week, last week, the Buffalo Bills going forward after this bye week, they get to play against an insane amount of bad teams. They get to play against Miami I think twice in 5 weeks. Washington's on that slate. I really do think going forward, there are a lot of teams in which we have to pay attention to in terms of schedule. Now, there are teams down here that are in the bottom in terms of difficulty. It does not mean that I don't want a piece of Tyreek Hill. I certainly do. If someone's going to deal me Tyreek Hill because they are afraid of the schedule, I'm perfectly fine with playing him. I want pieces of these offenses. I want Adam Thielen. I want Tyreek Hill. I don't mind having an Odell Beckham at the right price. I don't mind having Keenan Allen despite the struggles of that offense. There are a lot of these wide receiver ones that, in my opinion, no matter what the matchup is, they are matchup proof. Unless you're getting, Stephon Gilmore on your back and Devin McCourty or Jason McCourty are triple covering you, you should be fine. You should be perfectly fine. So that's exactly what I just want to convey to you guys. Do not be worried if you have a wide receiver that sits in the middle of the pack or the bottom of the pack in terms of schedule, especially in the fantasy playoffs. I've seen some crazy shit happen. I promise you, it does not determine success 100% of the time. This is just a moniker of trying to get an understanding of what exactly we can expect to see, but this is no guarantee. This is why we review this kind of stuff. This is why we talk about this. This is why I'm bringing it to everyone's attention so that we're all prepared. Like I mentioned yesterday, the luckiest among us, especially when we talk about fantasy football, everyone wants to throw it up to luck, right? It has luck, but the luckiest among us are often the most prepared, and I wanted to make sure that everyone was prepared going into the coming weeks so that you can get your trades done before the trade deadline in your respective league, collect the players that you believe are going to help you win a fantasy championship so that if, in fact, when we get to the fantasy championships, we don't have to worry about playing matchups and picking up people off the waivers and hoping to God, guys. No. We're going to have it set, and we're going to have it settled by that time. And hopefully, we're going to be catching some W's there, and everyone's going to be celebrating in December. So that is all settled and taken care of. Outside of that, really, there really isn't much else. There are obviously teams here that I don't want any pieces of. The Tennessee Titans, sure. They have Corey Davis, they have A.J. Brown, they have Adam Humphries. But do you think that Andrew is interested in any of them? Perhaps Adam Humphries at one time. Perhaps, what was it? Corey Davis, that was last year. In 2018, Andrew had an interest in Corey Davis. At this point, unless Marcus Mariota wants to turn the ship around or Ryan Tannehill is going to be given the spot and actually turn this offense around, not really interested in those offensive pieces. Looking at the Jaguars at 10, that's difficult. Besides Chark, I don't really want anybody else. Is that a offense that I want to invest in? Really, I don't truly want to. The Redskins, don't want to invest in them. The Cardinals, perhaps if Christian Kirk is healthy, because what we've seen of Larry Fitzgerald as of late, not great. But again, this is all perspective to kind of give you guys an idea on who you should potentially be going after, who should potentially be kept on roster for the fantasy playoffs and rest of season, and who you should have some trust in. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. If you like today's video, please like the button, click the like button down below, smash that subscribe button now. Click the subscribe button, join the community. If you go down into the comment section, I'm sure there are people down there willing to help you out, answer questions. If you want my personal help on questions, go over to my Patreon. The link is also down in the description. Unlimited questions answered on a weekly basis. Also, private live streams, rankings on a weekly basis, flex, positional, kicker, defense, all of the above. We get it done over there at Patreon. So if you're interested, click on the link. Go check it out. You don't need to join. Just check out the link. That's all I ask. Thank you again, guys. I do appreciate you guys spending your time watching today's videos. Running backs earlier, this is today. Tomorrow we will have Wide Receiver Wednesday. So we're going to be kind of transitioning from wide receivers over there. We could do this strength of schedule video for the quarterbacks and tight ends. Let me know again. If it's popular by demand, we'll do it. But typically, quarterback and tight end videos on a weekly basis don't get as many views because who you have on roster typically is what you're going to play with for the rest of the season. If you have Travis Kelce as your tight end, it's not like you're going and grabbing somebody else for the fantasy playoffs. That's not going to be the case. And typically, if you have if you have Marcus Mariota as your quarterback, you're in some trouble. But if you have Russell Wilson outside of his bye week, you're not really worrying about anything. So I don't think we need to do that video. But if we, in fact, I get a lot of likes on this video, if we can smash the like button enough to where we're getting to a point where Andrew's like, oh man, people want this video, then I'll consider doing it. But either way, tomorrow, Wide Receiver Wednesday, Thursday, quarterback, tight end ranking video. Friday, we will have Hidden Gems. Saturday, Andrew doing Patreon live stream. Sunday, don't forget to meet us up here, 8:30 PST, Pacific Standard Time, AM, for a live stream, answering questions before kickoff. Anyway, thank you again for watching today's video. And until next time, I will see you guys. That'll be tomorrow. Have a good one. Peace.